And I remember on one of their early albums, they had a song called "My Throat Is an Open Grave." And I remember reading that and I'm just kind of being like, oh, listen, tell you what, death metal gonna death metal, you know? I was like, these bands love to be dramatic. And then one day I was reading the Psalms. I don't know where it is, but that's directly out of the Psalms, that verse. My
Really?
throat is an open grave. That comes directly out of scripture.
Okay.
Okay. 1, 2, ready, go.
Welcome to the Called to Be Bad podcast. My name is Mariah Martin, and I feel called to be bad. It turns out I'm not the only one. Join us as we dig into all things bad, scandalous, deviant, you know, the stuff that makes good church folks squirm in the sanctuary. Why? Well, because sometimes the scandalous is spiritual, deviant is divine, and bad is beautiful. Say yes to the call, and let's see what holy trouble we get into today. Hi, Caley. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Mariah. Thank you. It's good to be here.
Why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and your current pastoral context?
Yeah, so I am originally from the Midwest, from South Dakota, but I am pastoring in Reedley, California, at First Mennonite Church, which is a church with two congregations, an English and a Spanish congregation, and that is one part of my pastoral ministry. But I also am the chaplain at the Sierra View Retirement Homes here, which is the Mennonite retirement home, and I am one of the directors up at Camp Keola, which is our camp. And so when I think of my pastoral context, I feel like it also includes those things. So I kind of juggle, depending on the day, what I'm doing. But that's kind of the wheel of what I'm doing around here.
You've got a whole handful of contexts there.
Yeah, I do. I moved out here really just with the pastoring thing, and then other things opened up, and I kept adding it until I had to start saying no. So it's been really good.
Switching gears a little bit, I assume most pastors struggle with the notion that they're doing their job good enough. How have you struggled with your sense of being good enough? And what is your sense of what makes a good pastor?
Yeah. You know, I talked a little earlier about resisting the job or title of pastor, and it's not because I didn't like pastors. It was because I think it's an intimidating mantle to put on.
Sure.
And there's kind of this idea of pastor is kind of somehow stoically distant and removed and the shepherd of the flock, and this is the person that has the answers for everything, and has some kind of special communication with God that other people just haven't been able to obtain. And I find kind of in our modern context, that's not who I was, and have found that that's not what my peers in particular are looking for, really, even in a pastor. And so I think because I never really wanted to be the kind of typical pastor, or what I saw as a typical pastor, I needed to be coaxed along the way. And every time within ministry, I have been asked to kind of take another step forward into kind of pastoral ministry, it was always with the understanding that this is me. If you like the way that I have been, if this is what you like, I can give you more of this, but I cannot be something that I'm not. So as long as you're okay with your pastor being a little bit more informal and being a little bit more goofy and being a little bit more honest about when I don't have the answers, if you find that refreshing and life-giving, and that is something that you want in your church, then I can be that. So I think I have asked the people around me all the time whether that's good enough for them, and so far it has been. I think, yeah, like I said, I think people's expectations of what a pastor is and what role they want them to play in their lives is changed drastically. And I see that quite a bit from my work at Sierra View to my work with youth. I think in a lot of ways, I maybe confound the people at Sierra View as far as their traditional understanding of what a chaplain would be. First of all, I'm quite a bit younger than most chaplains, and second of all, I'm not a stoic pastor type, and I think both residents and workers have just kind of had to kind of adjusted and wrap their mind around what does it mean in our modern world, um, for a pastor to, what does it mean to pastor today?
Mm-hmm.
I When it comes to the characteristics of pastors, I think pastors are servant leaders. I love Henry Nouwen's idea that pastors are wounded healers.
Mm.
I think that we're meaning makers. We help people understand what is the point, what is the meaning. We help connect the dots for people and sit with them and listen to them talk things out loud. I think we're curators of hope. We are help to identify where the hope is in the world and how we can connect to it, believing that God at the end of the day is a God of hope and that is always redeeming and restoring. And none of those things necessarily have to be kind of suit and tie behind a pulpit. All of those things can take different forms. And I think I'm a prime example of that. If you were expecting a suit and tie preacher, that's pretty disappointing, but I haven't found a lot of people that have walked away on account of that. So,
Yeah. When I did my ministry inquiry program, I did it in Oregon, and I had a host family, and I went to meet the host grandparents, and I told them that I was doing this pastoral internship, and they were probably in their 80s. They were just like flabbergasted by me. When they would offer people wine with dinner, they were just like, "You're gonna drink wine too?"
yeah.
Yes, and got to know them, and at one point, the my host grandfather, I guess you would say, he just like looked at me and he's like, I know you want to be a pastor, but you're just so human. And I was like,
Mhm.
yes, I am. Like, I think his view of pastors was kind of like what you were saying, this kind of suit and tie, stoic. I don't know. I'm picturing like a robot that is just like spitting out Bible verses, and we do not fit that type.
Yeah. Yeah, we kind of defy this kind of hierarchy. And I think we tend to think that like, oh, hierarchy, that's kind of more of the system within the Catholic Church. But I think even in the free church tradition, there is or even at work when I'm talking with my coworkers, some of whom go to church, many of whom don't. A lot of the comments that they make are just kind of this assumption that I have a closer relationship to God than they do.
Yes.
That some people in life are just more in tune with the divine, and those people become pastors. And I guess it would be one of my missions to encourage people that there is to not draw this line between the secular and the sacred. That if we are created in the image of God, we are sacred beings that are always reaching out to want to know more and to be full and to be whole and to ask deeper and bigger questions, and all of us are able to live into that. And I'm very glad for the vocation and the occupation which pays us some to be able to have the time to do the kind of reading and discussing that other people don't have the time in 40-hour work weeks, so that we can kind of maybe help them think about things that they haven't thought about before. But I don't think it's because I am qualified in a way that another person is not. I think I pursued this vocation in my life because I'm passionate about it. Not everybody is passionate about getting theological, and that's fine. But I do think that um, that boundary between the ordinary and the extraordinary, we need to work at breaking that down. I think to really enjoy life, you need to be able to find the beauty and the surprise and the mystery in the very ordinary things in life.
Yeah. Preach. I love it. So do you know Sarah Bessey as an author,
I do
writer?
not.
Okay. She's a writer I appreciate. She does the Evolving Faith conference every year. It used to be with Rachel Held Evans. Anyway, she will often ask people this question that I just love. And it is, what is saving your life right now? And it could be as little as, like, Sarah loves Schitt's Creek, the show.
Uh-huh.
And so, like, sometimes she'll say, Schitt's Creek is saving my life right now. Or it can be super profound, you know? Yeah. Anything come to mind?
I think when I am off the clock, I try to surround myself with people who are curious, who are joyful, who see the wonder of life, and I love kind of bouncing off of those people. I feel those attitudes are contagious, and they help spark that own part of me. I feel there's a lot of other times during my job where I have to contemplate the weighty and the heavy things, but I always make time for the lighthearted things. That's a very important part of my personality. It's not all of my personality, but it's an important part of it. So those people were very life-giving to me. In the same vein, I love dancing. I've been doing social dancing since college, swing, and since I moved out to California, salsa. And the pandemic has been really hard in that regard, because I think our culture values efficiency and productivity. And there is nothing less efficient and productive about your energy than dancing when you think about it. After an hour, you're exhausted, and it's like, well, what did you do? You didn't get from point A to point B. You were basically within this same 10 feet here, and now you're exhausted and sweaty. And what was that all about? And for me, that is almost defiantly taking a stand against all of these things in life that say life needs to be productive and serious. And
I love that. Combating capitalism through dance.
Exactly.
Sounds like a paper you need to write, or blog post or something.
It's not there's no social dancing right now, but I decided to look online for some solo jazz dancing, and so I found an instructor that is somewhere in Europe, and I subscribe to her, and I would say 3 days a week for about an hour. I dance in my kitchen, and I'm learning. I am continuing to learn. That's an important thing for me, to be able to continue to learn and to have a goal, and to maybe come out of the pandemic a better dancer than when I went in. But I am, every time I think, yeah, you know what, you're probably getting pretty good at this, and I record myself, and I'm like, oh no, maybe not for public consumption yet. But at the same time, I've had dance professors that have said, if you can walk, you can dance, and if you're having fun, you're doing it right. And so I've kind of taken that to heart, and yeah, that's been an outlet during the pandemic, especially. I make myself do it on days that I don't want to do it, and on days that I enjoy it. That's just a gift. But those small things enrich my life.
Yeah, I love that.
That's kind of an example of the type of things when I talk to people. I want to know, what is it that makes you feel alive? And especially with youth, I think we work really hard as we start with the traditional structure of church, and we say, okay, how do we get people excited about this? Right. And the reality is, there's a lot of people that you can't strong them into getting excited about something that was meaningful to their grandparents or their parents even. A much more helpful place to start, in my opinion, is to talk to people and say, what makes you feel alive? And let's talk about, where is God in that?
So I think it's time for the segment of our show that I am, as of now, calling Bad Pastor Tea Time, where we drink tea and spill the tea. Oh no. And talk about a controversial topic that I have not warned Caley about what is to come. But
all right. When you work when you work with young people, you realize that there's no question that's off limits. I find it refreshing. So
That's
give me
true.
your best shot.
Well, shoot, now I feel like I should have picked something harder. Anyways, so I know that you are very passionate about music. And
Yes.
Caley and I talked one time about how every person has this really oddly specific niche topic that you know a scary amount about, or you have a gross amount of books about this one topic. And I happen to know that Caley's topic is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's metal music and Christianity. Is that right? Or did I mess up the genre? What would you call it?
No, definitely. I would say the kind of the metal and the hardcore scene of and where it intersects with faith.
Okay. I should have mentioned before, but for those listening and not watching on Zoom, I have a really adorable blue mug with a bunny on it, and I'm drinking Black Currant Beauty Pukka, Pukka, Pukka tea. And what are you drinking today, Caley?
Yeah. So I'm at the church. I'm in my church office right now, and I grabbed the most boring mug because it was not crusty. Everything at the church, since nobody is in this building, is just a little bit crusty right now. And so this was a clean mug, and our cupboard was quite something to explore, but I found some vanilla chai. So cheers to you, Mariah.
I feel like there's some deep metaphor there about the church that's a little bit crusty. I don't know what it is, but there's something there to be church. Hello, beloved baddies. A quick break to tell you that this episode is sponsored by the Center for Art, Humor, and Soul, a nonprofit that supports and amplifies the voices of edgewalkers through art that catalyzes change, laughter that brings us together, and soul awakening to the creative spark within us. The support from the Center for Art, Humor, and Soul has meant the world to this podcast. So I highly encourage you to check out their website, arthumorandsoul.com, to see their other featured artists and projects. If you want to support the podcast, you can check out our Patreon or get in touch. Now I'll let you get back to this episode of Called to Be Bad. Anyways, okay, back to music. Sorry, say again, explain your love of music and Christian spirituality.
Yeah, I found when I was younger, I grew up listening to oldies with my parents and the best of the Beach Boys and this, that, and the other thing, while my friends kind of went through their Korn and Linkin Park and Marilyn Manson and all these other harder bands. And then all of a sudden, towards the end of high school, all of my friends started they got out of that and started listening to indie music. Mm-hmm. And ironically, my tastes only got heavier in music. And I kind of assumed that was a phase and that sooner or later I also would mellow out and would be listening to more bluegrass and folk and indie. And it hasn't been the case. I actually, my tastes in music have gotten heavier and heavier over the years. And I have asked myself a lot, why is that? Because a lot of this music, a lot of people say, well, that's just because that's for kids who are rebellious and are trying to get back at their parents, or they're trying to stand out in some way. And I don't really have an axe to grind. I had a fairly normal childhood. I'm fairly comfortable in my own skin. So I think in the last couple of years, I've been working a little bit at a time on this research project of why is it that it's so compelling to me, and realizing that that within Christian lament, that hardcore music actually serves as a really good vehicle for lament, for authentic, cathartic lament. And not all of the music is that. Most of it isn't, you might argue. But within it, there are a lot of things that are there's a lot of reasons why the bands that have crossed over between secular and Christian the most historically are hardcore bands. And I think it's because of their level of authenticity and their willingness to talk about dark thematic things and to give an avenue for people's rage. People always know when they want to praise, they can turn on K-Love, but for a long time, there was nowhere to go when you were feeling angry at God and when life was falling apart and you just wanted to say it like it was. You were kind of just supposed to hold that in because it wasn't faithful to express that. So I think I've been trying to explore what are the elements within music of this kind that are redemptive, and how can we separate that which is not from that which is.
I love this side of you because as the kids on TikTok would say, I picture you as like a golden retriever boy, like someone that just like has amazing energy and just like kind and generous and I don't know, gentle and fun. And then like I mean you dance in your kitchen for no one else but just the joy of dancing. And then to picture this angsty side of you where you're just like, no, it's not a phase, Mom. I'm gonna rage to my hardcore metal music. Oh, I just love it.
I sometimes wonder if it isn't a good outlet for me. I think pastors don't have the same space to be raw in the moment that other people do.
Yeah.
I think we were taught wisely in seminary that you preach from your scars and not from your wounds. You can talk about the things that you've been through, but you have to be a little bit more careful around what you're going through in the moment. And so, especially during, you could say, like a dark time like the pandemic, people are looking for hope, and it is your job during the day to look for it and to find it. Yet at the same time, those of us who are pastors also have a lot of big questions, and we also like to shake our fists at the sky sometime and get grumpy with God. And so this is, in a way, this is an outlet where I can go and I can be authentic, because I really feel I don't want to I'm not just a hope spewing machine. I also want to acknowledge where I see discontinuity. And the lament tradition in scripture, as I've kind of been studying, and once again, Walter Brueggemann's done a lot of important work there, which is to say, if you look at the Psalms and you look at some of the scriptures in the wisdom literature in the Old Testament, people really called God out, and they did so because they expected a lot of God, because they believed that God was there for them and that God would take them through. And if they were being faithful and things were going wrong in their lives, that was a reason to call God out. That was a sign of a healthy relationship with God. And so I think to be able to give hope, I also have to be able to come to God and to say, this isn't right. This doesn't make sense. You need to fix this.
Yeah.
And so I think there are spaces for doing that. And for me, the that music scene, whether it's live concert or just in my own car at full volume, those are spaces for me to do that, so that when I do need to turn around on a Sunday and come back and preach a sermon and say, where is the hope in this text, that I can do so without feeling phony.
Yeah. Could you ever picture a space within worship where it would be appropriate to play some heavy metal lament music?
There's if you go to Europe, there are some churches that do metal mass that kind of have a darker metal edged theme to like certain Sundays. It's fascinating stuff.
Wait, did you say metal mass, MASS, or metal?
Yeah, metal mass, like
oh my gosh, that's amazing.
These churches that they bring in these metal artists and they fill these churches.
What?
Yeah, I think worship spaces are very sensitive. So anytime that you bring something radically different in, you have to consider the effect that it has on everybody.
Right.
But I would argue that when you go to some of these concerts, sacred spaces are created there, and they're created in a space in which it is expected, and people came for that.
Yeah.
I've thought about, I want to eventually finish my research and publish and somewhere for something. And if I did something at church, I'd probably start with an evening presentation. So the people that were there
Chose to
came
be
because they knew what they were getting into. I don't really want to drop any kind of, you know, screaming drop D
and it would
angsty
be so
tunes
amazing.
on people that really just came for hymns and hope and things.
I know, but seeing people's faces if you did that would just be priceless.
Yeah.
I saw this, Caley and I are both in the Anabaptist Mennonite tradition, and I saw this meme of, you know, the Bernie Sanders meme that is going around everywhere of him sitting looking grumpy in a chair with these amazing mittens. And I saw this meme that one picture was when Mennonites aren't enjoying a service and it's Bernie. And then next to it is the very same picture saying when Mennonites are enjoying the service.
Right.
Like,
yeah,
Mennonites, you know, aren't very, what's the word?
Expressive. We're the chosen chosen.
Worship, exactly. So to picture Mennonites just losing their minds to heavy metal music, or just Christians in general, just floors me. I love that so much.
There is a lot of comparison with metal music, especially if you get into concerts and mosh pits and that kind of stuff, that actually has a lot more in common with kind of the Pentecostal movement of people of, I mean, in a live concert setting especially, it's very embodied.
Yes.
In a way that would look very distressing to people if you were to do it in church. But there is a certain kind of a release, and I think we live during a time when like kind of reining in and being in control of yourself is considered to be very socially appropriate and important. But you do find that it's kind of in those moments when you allow yourself to really let go and to lose yourself, that's when you experience those transcendent moments. The music is an outlet for transcendence in a world that is now very based in immanence, of this idea that everything is scientific and rational, and there's a good explanation for everything. Things that way are more predictable, they're more steady. There's a lot of wonderful things that have come to us through science and through logic and reason. But it's interesting that human beings have adopted that very much in Western culture, and yet at the same time yearn for transcendence. They yearn to be taken out of their normal bodied selves and to experience something beyond. And some denominations do quite a bit of that in worship. Mennonite churches, most Mennonite churches don't as much. I think there's something very valuable about being grounded and not allowing your emotions to dictate everything. At the same time, as somebody who is both a very rational academic person and also a very emotional person, I have found balance in my life by saying, in addition to what my worship and what I experience in kind of traditional worship services, I also supplement it with these sacred spaces that allow me to experience that kind of transcendence as well. And I think a lot of my research is, how do you allow yourself to experience those things in a safe way that that's not just kind of worshiping, I don't know, getting overwhelmed by the senses and if that's the only place that you find God, then everything else is a life without God. I think that has always been my reservation with worship services that insist on reaching euphoria in order to call it worship. And so I am very skeptical and reluctant in a lot of ways to really push people or manipulate people into these moments, but when they come naturally, it's very beautiful, and it's a very sacred experience.
When I mentioned how Mennonites tend to be stoic during worship, I was thinking of more of a westernized kind of white middle class Mennonite
Right.
church, not necessarily a global Mennonite church, which I think we could learn a lot from Mennonites that don't necessarily look like us or come from our own cultural context.
Yeah, that's a very important point, because even here in my own church, our Spanish service is very Pentecostal in that way. It's very loud. It's very engaged. A lot of a high level of intensity.
Right.
A lot of people that experience God through the vulnerability of allowing themselves to kind of be taken away by the presence of the Spirit in that space. And it's really cool to have that within one church, to have both of those things. We do combined worship sometimes, and everybody gives up something in order to do a combined worship. But I really do like that both services have their own thing in which they can be completely themselves. So yeah, it's really neat.
Yeah, I think about that all the time, about how we have to have these spaces where we can get out of ourselves a little bit and have this at once embodied and also disembodied experience of divinity, of euphoric divinity. And I like what you said about how we can't rely on that, but can we as a church create these safe spaces where people can lose themselves in a world where staying in control is so enforced, whether it be explicitly or implicitly.
Yes.
So I love that you're doing that you're pushing against that through dance and through music. The one question that I did have, my Bad Pastor Tea Time question in the line of music was, how would you respond to someone who said that rap or metal music, or the music that you're talking about, is demonic or of the devil? How would you respond to that?
Yeah, I think if you're looking for that, you can find that within the dark music, of course. And so those are the bands that make the headlines, and then a lot of people will associate certain images and certain themes with certain genres of music. But there is the Bible is really dark, as well.
Yes, preach.
And like I think about Demon Hunter is one of my favorite bands of all time. It's a metal band, and I guess sometimes it's categorized under the genre of death metal. And when people hear death metal, they think satanic, which the term for that is actually black metal. But
there's
death metal
genres and like subgenres. I
yes,
just get so much joy out of that. I don't
there are genres within genres,
and
the thing about death metal is really just metal that thematically kind of explores death. And there's nothing wrong with exploring death. As a matter of fact, it's really refreshing that somebody out there is talking about the fact that all of us are scared of death and are traumatized by death. And if you can have a band that engages that subject matter and then also embraces the silver lining, kind of like over half the hymns in the hymn book, over half the psalms
right, that's what
are lament psalms, and a lot of them are very dark. And then in the last few verses there is, but you are faithful, and so we persevere, that kind of thing. And a lot of the best dark lament music that I find is music that will take you to that authentic space, and then it will lift you out of that so that you're not dwelling in it. Because a lot of those bands also just kind of, they're really good at identifying the problem and not very good at giving you any solutions. And that's not very helpful. So the types of bands that I would tend to defend, I think, would be the bands that also are being really authentic, and then also giving you something at the end to kind of rise out of. And I remember on one of their early albums, they had a song called "My Throat Is an Open Grave." And I remember reading that and I'm just kind of being like, oh, listen, tell you what, death metal gonna death metal, you know? I was like, these bands love to be dramatic. And then one day I was reading the Psalms. I don't know where it is, but that's directly out of the Psalms, that verse.
Really?
My throat is an open grave. That comes directly out of scripture. And I think a lot of these bands are drawn into a lot of scriptural imagery. And there's obviously a lot of crucifixion imagery. The crucifixion, I mean, think about just how dark thematically Christianity is. Like, our most holy days revolve around this a day of torture and death.
Right.
And yet, growing up with it, it doesn't really shock us anymore. The communion is the blood and the body, and when it is done right, it is really, it's a really an amazing space to kind of explore themes of light and darkness and hope and despair in a way that a lot of more cheerful contemporary music just can't go there. Like, they're just not, the genre, the vehicle of the genre is just not capable of handling some of those themes. So yeah, I definitely wouldn't try to justify the entire genres, but I would say that within them there's really some amazing things happening.
Great. Well, thanks for coming on, Caley. Thanks for agreeing to do this. And
yeah, this has been wonderful. I've really enjoyed it.
Cool. That's all for this episode of Called to Be Bad. Keep being your bad, beautiful selves, and I will see you next time.